from your account. With cross-site request forgery, an attacker was able to add arbitrary movies to the rental queue, to change the order. Okay, he doesn't want to watch Goodfellas, he should watch The Big Lebowski, so I add that to the queue and put it in the front. But he also is able to change the name and the address, so he thinks, actually I want to watch The Big Lebowski, so I change this guy's address to mine address, and then I get The Big Lebowski. And this guy shouldn't really know that I rented The Big Lebowski on his name, so I also changed the email address and the password. And the only thing I don't change is the account number, because I don't want to pay for these nice DVDs. So this was really serious, and I don't know how long it was open. It's now fixed. Then this is something we found at University of Hamburg. WordPress is a well-known web application for weblogs. And WordPress, every weblog should look different, because we all are different, and this is what our weblogs communicate. And therefore we can, WordPress allows these users to change the templates of the application. And as WordPress is a web application, the template editor is a web application itself. And it was not secured against cross-site request forgery. And what makes things worse is that WordPress templates are PHP files. So if you know which general theme the user uses, and pretty much every user, there are like 4 or 5 really popular WordPress themes, and if you know those, then you could send this guy a link to a page with a cat, and when this guy goes on this page with the cat, his WordPress now has some more PHP code that you control, and you can take over his web server. Then there's this new meme called JavaScript malware. This is, when you look closer at JavaScript malware is nothing more than doing cross-site request forgery on IP-based schemes. There has been some research, and they found out that you can use JavaScript and image inclusion to do stuff like port scanning if you know some IP addresses, and you want to port scan, obviously, intranets. So what you do is you take this vulnerable or this malicious JavaScript, put it on a web page, and send it to somebody behind a firewall where you want to see what's inside this firewall or behind the firewall. He looks at the web page, we have the malicious JavaScript that does some port scanning in intranet and sends you back the data. So this is kind of ugly. There are really nice exploitation frameworks already available. And this is a screenshot of Beef. I think you can find it if you look for Beef and browser, because Beef is for browser exploitation something framework. And this is amazing. And also I think this is a really, really big issue, because every corporate application has an intranet. And most of the intranets either use no authentication or some automatic magic, like NTLM or client-side SSL. And every corporation allows their web users to surf the web, because this is kind of important for research and also for entertainment. And with these techniques, those intranet servers are completely open to the world. You can do some DNS stuff that we found out at University of Hamburg as well, to actually get the stuff that is on the web pages. So there are right now good techniques to get the contents of all internet web servers, to find those internet web servers and to get the contents of all internet web servers. And also the other stuff. So I think cross-site request forgery is a big problem, and we think it can be changed on the user side. We can change the web browser to make it less of an issue. And so I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I met the chief corporate security from Mozilla Corporation. And she looked at pretty much every talk but mine. So I thought, okay, she knows about this stuff. She cares. And then I went to her and said, hey, you're at Mozilla, and what do you think about this? And this should be changed. And she was totally dismissive. And she thinks it's not a big issue, and users should be careful. And Firefox is an end-user product and not for corporate usage. And so it's no kidding, she told me that. And so I told Justus that, and Justus was, okay, they probably know what cross-site request forgery is. And he looked at some code Mozilla wrote.
I looked at Mozilla well-known bug tracking system developed at Mozilla. And actually, Mozilla's Bugzilla is vulnerable against session writing. So I do have an exploit. They do know about this. And they don't really care, though. They do know about it, but it's not important enough to fix it in a minor release. Can you turn the microphone a bit down? Yeah? Okay. And developing exploits is really easy, but this one was not that easy. It takes about 5 minutes to do so, but this one took actually 10 minutes because I had to look at the source code of Bugzilla, which is Perl. And you just leave out one parameter for the form, and it works fine. So I don't know, it was quite easy.
If you're interested in finding out how to do this in 5 minutes, I think Justus has a lightning talk today where it tells you how to write exploits for your own web applications, create cross-site request forgery.
Live, and 5 minutes for a working application out there.
Okay, so I think we all agree now cross-site request forgery is a problem. And the main problem is that cross-site request forgery or session writing or CSRF or how we want to call it, those vulnerabilities are not really caused by programming mistakes. If you look at any HTML book, and I've looked at a lot, there's not one single HTML book that tells you about this stuff or how to avoid it. The reason is that this implicit authentication foo is outside of the scope of HTTP or HTML. Therefore, if you write textbook HTML code or textbook web applications, and your textbook is older than like 2005, your code that looks completely correct and is like from the web, from the book or from some web page, is vulnerable. If we want to prevent session writing, cross-site request forgery, CSRF, or whatever, if we want to prevent that, we actually have to fix the protocol. Because this, I think I've told you everything about that. There are 3 reasons for that. We don't have a dedicated authentication credential in web browsers and HTTP and anything. Cookies are not meant for authentication. HTTP authentication is not meant for authentication tracking, but for one single request. Client-side SSL doesn't really work as well, and who relies on a firewall for authentication should be shot anyway. Then we have a lot of state-changing GET requests. And this is something where the HTTP or the internet draft says you shouldn't do this. We have POST for state-changing. GET is something to get information, POST is to do something stateful. But application developers doesn't care about that. And we have JavaScript, and JavaScript is a security nightmare by itself. Okay, if you develop web applications, you should try to avoid this problem. And in the next 3 slides, we will tell you how to do that. Before we tell you how to do that, we tell you how not to do it. Because this is another thing. There are a lot of misconceptions. And still, I think in the top 10 hits by Google, or at least last weekend was that case, there's still at least one page that tells you something wrong. The first misconception that lived for a long, long time is if you only accept POST requests, you're safe. You don't have a problem with cross-site request forgery. Because cross-site request forgery is including an image somewhere, and with an image you only can create and GET requests. So if you only accept POST requests, the attacker is out of luck. This is completely untrue. You can do this if we showed you with a hidden iframe and some JavaScript, or with a pop-up window and some social engineering, and you can create arbitrary POST requests. Then the next misconception is that if you check your referrer, you are safe. And this is half a misconception, or like a quarter misconception, or maybe because the referrer actually should give us the information that we want, that this request comes from our web application and goes to our web application. So it's an inner web application request, and is therefore should be authorized. The problem is there are many, many people that don't send referrers for privacy reasons, and I think this is a good idea to do so. But there are people that spoof referrers for different reasons, for circumventing some access control or just for confusing Google. And for this reason, you at least have to accept, if you do a large-scale web application, not something in your corporation, then you maybe can rely on referrers. But if you do something like YouTube or something big that you want everybody in the world should use, then you have to accept requests that don't contain any referrer information, because there are about 1/4 of the requests that don't have one. Because, for example, a lot of people don't even know that they're suppressing referrers. If you have, like Carrio personal firewall or some other personal firewall thing installed or some anti-spyware, they often drop referrers without even letting the user know. So you have this big chunk of requests without referrers, and if you don't want to lose like 1/3 of your potential customers, you have to accept those requests. And we looked a little bit deeper into the web browsers, and we found for every browser but Opera, at least 1 or 2 methods where a web application can create referrerless requests on a web browser that is configured to send referrers. So relying on referrers, if you accept referrerless requests, you're lost. So you shouldn't do this. Furthermore, there are, I think, every 3 or 4 months there comes another advisory, usually from Emmett Klein from Israel, that finds another way how to spoof referrers. First, he had something where you could spoof referrers with HTTP response splitting. Then he looked at Flash and found out that with Flash 8 point something, you could spoof referrers because you can send arbitrary header values into HTTP requests. And I think there are still a lot of new undiscovered ways to spoof referrers. So you should not rely on referrers. What can you do? At first, I told you explicit authentication is immune against cross-site request forgery. Therefore, you can just switch to explicit authentication. URL rewriting or form-based. The problem with URL rewriting is that you have then so-called session identifier leakage. If you have your session identifier, this is a really sensitive information because whoever has the session identifier is pretty much you, because he knows your authentication context. If you have this in the URL, then it's stored in proxy logs and is sent over the wire, and also is sent via referrers if you don't do anything about that. So if you don't really know, if you really know what you're doing and how to get rid of the referrers and how to do some sanity checks if you receive a session identifier that you don't really trust, don't do that. With form-based session tokens that are better because they are, the session identifier is communicated in the post part of the web page, you have usability problems because the back button often does funny things if you try to go through a lot of clicks that were created by submitting HTML forms. So this is not a good solution either. What I kind of like, but what I haven't seen once, and I don't know why, is if you would combine explicit and implicit authentication. So you have like a request identifier in a URL and a session identifier in your cookie, and you need both information to be authenticated, then you're in the clear. But this is something you don't want to program yourself as well. You need a framework to do that, and there's no framework out right now that does this out of the box. And SID leakage in the referrer still might be a little problem, but I won't go too deep in that. This is what you should do. This is what the recommendation of the day is. If you have an HTML form that does anything that needs authentication and does anything stateful, you should use one-time nonces. So that the web application itself is able to verify, okay, this guy is sending a post request because I gave him the form before. So if the web application has to do mapping between a user session identifier and this one-time value, and only post requests that contain such a one-time value are acceptable. Everything else will be thrown away. Yeah. Also, you can protect against local attacks. So if you allow users to use arbitrary images for their user profiles, you should serve them yourself. You should download them and serve them from your web page so that you have the URL under control.